The wind arrives first, like a long breath held for centuries and finally released. It lifts the desert in slow, deliberate waves, combing grains of sand through crevices no eye has seen in 1,000 years. You can smell metal in the air, sun-warmed rock, old dust, a faint tang like rain that never comes. On a ridge above the Dead Sea, a storm gathers its voice. Somewhere, a bell of copper is struck without a hand. This is how some secrets choose to be found, not by scholars at their desks, but by weather. It is October 1978. A patrol of archaeologists, exhausted and half-blinded, traces the cliff line near Qumran's 11th cave. The desert is a patient teacher. It wears you down to what you truly are. They move single file, rope on rope, boot in the stale footprints of the one ahead, when the sandstorm tilts and the wall of grit opens like a curtain. A fissure appears where there was none. The first man kneels, brushes the lip of the crack, and feels an edge that is not stone at all. He does not say what he feels. He calls for a lamp. They wedge themselves into the narrow crawl, shoulders scraping, packs hissing against the rock. The light flutters. The air is colder in here, ancient cold, as if the cave keeps its own calendar. And there, half buried in silt, a cylinder, green as the skin of an old statue, sealed with hammered seams. Even before the scale tips or the brush makes its first circle, everyone understands the thing in the earth is a sentence in a language older than theirs. The storm claws at the entrance. The lamp trembles. They do not speak. They know, instinctively, that silence is the correct liturgy for what is about to be lifted. Later there will be photographs, labels, conservators, arguments in careful rooms. But in the cave, all that exists is pulse and breath, and the soft percussion of bristles on compacted dust. The cylinder rises from the sand like a buried instrument. When the lid yields, it is not with drama, but with the relief of a held note resolving. Inside lies a roll of metal leaf, and, swaddled within, a script not meant for public squares. Copper protects what parchment would never have survived. Copper remembers. What did they read first? Perhaps a name, perhaps a formula of witness. I, Eleazar ben Shimon, teacher, keeper of our rule, an old man who writes with the breath left in him. He says he saw a youth from the north arrive like the first light over salt water. He says the boy spoke almost nothing at all, and yet, before he ever taught, he carried in his quiet a grammar we had forgotten, permission asked without words, reverence shown without performance, patience longer than the road from Jericho. When we say lost years, we imagine a blank, years erased, faceless, without posts to guide us across. Eleazar dares to write the opposite. The years were not empty. They were full to spilling with instruction no gospel had room to hold. The manuscripts we keep in display cases can turn a life into a diagram. The desert kept a life in motion. The Essenes called themselves sons of light, but what they learned in their caves was how to become vessels of stillness, so clear within that the light could pass through without distortion. A copper scroll is a hard teacher, too. It does not flatter. It refuses to hurry. The letters run like dark thread across hammered metal. You cannot skim a sentence and pretend to have heard it. So the reader, whoever he is, must fight his habits. He must slow the eye, lower the chest, graze each line like a palm along a wall in the dark. Slowly, a world comes forward, water drawn before dawn, bread broken in quiet, work undertaken as if labor itself were a prayer. It is not the austerity that arrests, the fasting, the rules, the early light. It is the way attention turns each act into offering. The discipline is precise, the spirit inside it, wide as the sky. A story is told among the Bedouin about a night when the desert lost its sound. A grandfather and a boy were riding to the salt flats when the wind simply stopped, mid-gust, the way a singer swallows a note, and the camels froze as if listening. The boy, frightened, asked what it meant. The old man said, "Somewhere, someone has spoken a true word, and the desert is making room for it." Eleazar writes like a man who has seen that word spoken, a word not made of syllables, but of presence. He remembers the day the youth stood at the gate and did not press his case. He did not list his virtues or imply them. He did not recite his lineage. He simply inclined his head and waited, letting silence do what speech cannot. Extend trust before it is reciprocated. Their overseer came and studied him the way shepherds study weather, not the cloud itself, but what the cloud portends. The question, "Are you willing to die before you live?" was posed the way their tradition required, like a key proffered for the applicant to try in his own lock. The boy closed his eyes, and in that interval Eleazar claims to have learned more than in 20 winters of commentaries, not because the boy was grand, because he answered with a breath measured against the weight of the question, not the pressure of the audience. In some houses of prayer, piety is measured by volume. How loud the chorus, how fervent the plea. In Qumran, piety was measured by clarity, how unclouded the water when you looked into it. The youth slept little, Eleazar tells us, but he did not stagger under his wakefulness. He rose before the bell, not as a rebel against structure, but as one whose inner bell rang earlier. He ate as if eating were the last honest sacrament, grain to mouth, mouth to silence, silence to gratitude. He learned the rules without making of them a spectacle, and when he failed, as every novice fails, he failed without complaint, the way a bow fails to sing if the hand is wrong. Then he corrected his hand. Not everyone welcomed him. Communities, even holy ones, are ecologies. A creature enters with a new frequency, and the flock shifts. Some brothers watched him with tight jaws. Others with admiration they mistook for suspicion. A few attempted friendship and found, to their surprise, that companionship could be built on long stretches of shared quiet and the smallest exchange of bread. The animals of the wadis noticed first. Where most men made them skitter and vanish, the boy drew them near, lizards flattening to stone at his heel, cats curling in the lee of his robe as if it were a warm wall at dusk. Eleazar risks saying what scholars might call metaphor. It reads truer as field note. Silence has a field, and the living feel it. We moderns love provenance, dates, stamps, peer review. These have their place. But in Eleazar's manner runs another standard of proof. He offers a series of scenes so crisp they resist invention. A reed pen stilled above a line of Isaiah because the line struck too near. The broom held like a scepter, not in pride, but in careful stewardship of a courtyard. All labor lit from within. Attention is the beginning of devotion, a later poet writes. One suspects Eleazar would nod and add, devotion is the beginning of healing. Whoever handled the scroll in that lab in 1978 must have felt, despite the gloves and protocols, a nearness that archives cannot sterilize. A man 40 generations removed from the caves suddenly shares a room with a voice that refuses hurry, that instructs by presence. A memory, his or ours, shifts, like a vertebra clicking home. We thought the missing years were blank. We discover they were dense. We thought the secret was an esoteric formula. We find it is a way of being taught by the quiet at the center of all sound. There are many doors into a mystery. Some open to the clever, some open to the broken. Eleazar's door opens to the patient. He closes his first testimony not with thunder, but with an invitation disguised as a warning. What follows, he says without saying, was never meant to be shouted. It must be received the way a seed is, in darkness, with time, under a listening earth. The storm above Qumran ended hours ago. The sand settled. The fissure is once again a seam in a cliff that looks like every other. But a cylinder has been lifted, a script unrolled, and a path that begins in silence beckons. A youth from the north waits just beyond the threshold, a traveler between words, about to step into a community that believes it knows the language of God and is about to learn a dialect it has forgotten. What do we call the power that enters a place without raising dust and yet changes the air for everyone in it? Eliezer has a name. He calls it the power of silence. And the boy who carries it has just arrived. The first time I saw him, I thought he had walked straight out of a story. The desert has a way of stripping men bare, yet this youth arrived with a stillness that no heat or hunger could consume. He came alone, not with caravan bells jingling, not under the shadow of wealthy patrons, but on foot, dust clinging to his simple robe, an olive wood staff his only companion. The spring month of Nisan had brought pilgrims through Jericho in droves, yet he walked apart, as if guided by a compass none of us could read. His eyes, Eliezer insists on this, were not ordinary. They carried the weight of horizons, as though he had already stood where most men spend their lives trying to reach. Not ambition, not calculation. Something else, a gaze that was already familiar with silence. When he stood at the entrance of our community, he did not speak. He bowed his head. He waited. That act alone was his first teaching. Permission asked through silence, reverence without the noise of flattery, humility that unlocks doors, arrogance keeps sealed. Our master, Yohanan the Purifier, emerged to meet him. No words at first, only the wind drawing the hems of their garments into a quiet dance. It was as if creation itself leaned in to overhear. They regarded one another for long minutes, not as strangers, but as two mirrors testing the depth of reflection. Finally, Yohanan inclined his head in acceptance. The youth had passed his first trial without knowing there was one. Only then did he speak, his voice clear yet gentle. I have come to learn the way of the sons of light. My mother told me of you, the keepers of the hidden mysteries. There was no urgency in his tone, no desperation, no bargaining. His words flowed the way water runs over polished stone, naturally, effortlessly. Even then, peace clung to him like a garment no hand had woven. Yohanan asked the question all aspirants faced. Are you willing to die before you live? Many before him had rushed their answers, burning with the arrogance of youth, promising anything for entry. This boy did not. He closed his eyes, inhaled, and let the weight of the question settle into the marrow of his being. His pause was longer than a heartbeat, shorter than eternity. When he opened his eyes, he smiled. Master, I believe I have already begun to die. That is why I have come, to learn how to finish dying so that I may truly live. Those words did not belong to 18 years. They belonged to centuries, to souls who had endured and returned, to wisdom fermented in silence until it became wine. He was given cell 7, the chamber once inhabited by another seeker, the man the world would later call the baptizer. He received the novice's white robe and the strict rhythm of our order: rise before dawn, work in silence, eat in silence, pray in silence. To most, these rules felt like chains. To him, they were water to a parched traveler. That first night, Eliezer found him seated at his threshold, gazing at the stars. He did not sit in our postures, nor follow our breathing methods. He simply was. Present, unmoved, absorbed in the vast quiet above. We cultivated silence as a discipline, but he embodied it as nature. Where we were gardeners tending a fragile crop, He was the garden itself. By the second dawn, when the bell tolled for prayer, we found him already seated in perfect stillness. He looked less like a visitor and more like one who had grown from the desert floor itself. Around him, thoughts settled without effort, as if his very presence was an invitation to lay burdens down. Other traditions speak of such arrivals. In the East, the sages write of wanderers who appear at the threshold of an ashram, drawn by dreams. In the teachings of the Buddha, a novice may cross mountains guided by nothing but a question. The Greeks told of youths who walked into the schools of philosophers, seeking not rhetoric, but truth. Always the same pattern: silence at the gate, a willingness to die before living, and a teacher who recognizes in them a reflection of mysteries older than scrolls. And so it was here. The youth from Nazareth did not come to us as a blank tablet, waiting to be inscribed. He came as fire banked under ash, needing only the breath of the desert to flare. We thought we were his instructors. We did not yet understand. We had received not merely a student, but a teacher who would remind us of lessons we had forgotten. Elizar closes his memory of those days with a confession. That first week, he found himself unsettled, almost ashamed. For 20 years he had labored at silence as if chipping away at a stone. And yet here was one who carried silence the way lungs carry air. Were we training him? Or was he sent to awaken us? This question would deepen with each dawn, but already the seed of revelation was planted. The youth had entered the gates, the scroll had begun its unwinding, and none of us, then or now, would ever be the same. The desert awakens before the sun does. First comes the hush, heavy and absolute, as if the earth itself inhales. Then the faint rustle of palm fronds, the muted shuffle of sandals across sand, the groan of water jars lifted from stone basins. In Qumran, dawn was not an hour. It was a ritual. We rose while darkness still clung to the cliffs, so that our first breath of the day belonged to prayer, not to labor. For the newcomer, these rules were explained carefully. He was told that every sound mattered, each footstep, each breath, each clink of pottery. To us, silence was discipline. It was the furnace where the impurities of self were burned away. For most novices, the regimen was severe. They fought it as the body fights chains. Yet for him, the silence seemed like his native tongue. Cell 7 was sparse, woven mat, clay pitcher, small window slit where moonlight fell like a blade. We had seen novices buckle under that solitude, inventing excuses to wander, desperate to fill the emptiness with chatter. He, by contrast, wore the solitude like a robe. On the very first night, Eliezer observed him sitting at the threshold, spine straight, gaze lifted to the night sky. He did not breathe in measured patterns as we taught. He simply existed in a stillness so complete that even the stars seemed to gather around him. When the morning bell rang, the brothers filed toward the sacred hall with steady steps and trained expressions. Yet the youth was already there, seated as though he had grown from the very stone. He did not stir when others arrived, did not break the spell of his silence to greet. He only sat, eyes lowered, hands resting gently on his knees. And in that presence, even the racing minds of seasoned brothers slowed of their own accord. Work followed prayer. Novices were assigned the humblest tasks: sweeping the courtyards, carrying water, scrubbing clay bowls caked with last night's grain. Many resisted in secret. They dreamed of scrolls and hidden mysteries, of revelations sung in angelic voices, not of blistered hands and aching shoulders. Yet when the broom was placed in his grip, he received it with the reverence one might give a sacred relic. His movements were neither hurried nor lazy. They were exact, graceful, complete. Sweeping became for him not drudgery, but liturgy. Watching him, Eliezer thought, if the world were built of such movements, it would already be whole. At mealtime, the lesson deepened. In our order, eating was done without words, with each bite taken as prayer. But where most of us obeyed the custom mechanically, he approached the bread with luminous care. He broke it slowly, held it briefly as though listening to it, then ate. To watch him chew was to watch a man savor not wheat alone, but the miracle of being alive to taste it. The brother seated opposite whispered later, eyes wide. It was as if he turned bread into light. And when study hours came, he did not merely copy verses onto parchment, as was our habit. He leaned into the text as though conversing with the prophets themselves. When his reed pen traced Isaiah's cry, "Prepare the way of the Lord in the wilderness," his eyes filled, not with fatigue, but with recognition. It seemed the words had been waiting centuries for his hands. That evening, when silence fell absolute across the compound, Eliezer passed by his cell again. There he saw the youth beneath the stars, not alone, but encircled by desert cats, creatures usually skittish, untamable. They curled at his feet, purring into the night, as if drawn by warmth no fire could offer. The desert itself seemed to recognize him. Our community had spent decades chiseling silence into ourselves, like sculptors hammering stone. But he was silence carved already, shaped by mysteries older than our rules. Where we practiced, he embodied. Where we strained, he rested. We had thought ourselves his teachers. Yet even then, in the flicker of lamplight, Eliezer felt the uneasy truth rise in his chest. We were in the presence not of a student, but of one who would one day teach the world what silence truly means. And so the question grew sharper with each day. What happens when the desert meets one who is already desert within? The answer was not yet clear, but the stillness gathering around him promised revelation, and we would all be remade by it. 7 days had passed since his arrival when Johanan, our master, summoned Eliezer at dusk. The light bled crimson across the cliffs, painting the stones like an altar fire. Eliezer remembers the expression on Johanan's face, not severity, but awe, as if he had glimpsed something beyond words. "This youth," Johanan whispered, "must face the trial of silence, not the 3 days given to ordinary novices, 7 days, entire, without a single word." Eliezer recoiled. "7, master. Even our most seasoned brothers falter after 3. It will break him." Johanan shook his head slowly, his eyes lit with a strange conviction. "It will not break him. It will reveal him. The remnants of his old tongue must die, so that the true word may be born. Only the furnace of perfect silence can melt away what still binds him." And so that same night, they led the youth to the cave of fasters, carved in the living rock 1/2 an hour's walk from the community. The chamber was bare, a mat of reeds, a clay jar of water, a small bowl of dates rationed 1 per day. The rule was absolute. No whisper, no gesture, no sound. The silence must be total, within and without. Other novices had entered that cave with trembling. Some wept before the first dawn. Others clawed at their mats, desperate for the sound of another human breath. But when the youth received the instructions, his eyes did not flicker with fear. Instead, Eliezer saw in them something unsettling. Expectation, like a man who had waited all his life for this very door. He bowed, serene, and stepped inside. For 3 days, Eliezer carried water to him. Each time he found him unmoving, seated cross-legged, spine straight, hands loose upon his knees. His eyes remained closed, not clenched in effort, but at rest, as though he had returned home. The cave, usually filled with the sighs and fidgets of novices, grew strangely quiet, as if the air itself had thickened with his presence. On the fourth day, the silence deepened into something alive. When Eleazar entered, he noticed lizards skittering boldly near the youth's still body, unafraid. Birds alighted at the cave mouth, their songs soft as prayers. By the fifth day, even a serpent coiled itself beside his sandal, harmless, as though the very wilderness had laid down its suspicion. And more, Eleazar himself changed. Each time he climbed the rocky path with water and dates, his own thoughts, normally restless, burdened with duties, grew hushed. He found his footsteps lighter, his breath slower, his hands careful without his willing it. The silence within the cave bled outward, shaping him. It was not the absence of sound. It was a presence, dense and radiant, pressing gently against everything it touched. By the sixth day, the youth's face had transformed. Stillness radiated from him like heat from a sunstone. Eleazar could barely look without feeling both pierced and consoled. He realized, to his astonishment, that he himself had ceased making noise. No clatter of jar, no careless sigh. The silence had discipled him too. Then came the storm. On the seventh day, the desert howled with fury. Winds raked the cliffs, hurling sand like shards of glass. Hermits had gone mad in such storms, broken by the shriek of air and grit. Eleazar feared the youth would be undone. He forced his way to the cave, the gale tearing at his robe. Inside, he found him as before, motionless, half buried in sand that had rushed through the fissures, yet smiling faintly as though he had found a refuge deeper than rock. His stillness was not defiance, nor trance. It was rootedness. He had become like a tree whose roots reached so far into the unseen that no storm could wrench him free. At sunset, Eleazar touched his shoulder gently. "It is finished. You may speak." The youth opened his eyes, slow as dawn. Light seemed to dwell in them, a light born not of day, but of depths. He breathed, and then said his first words in 7 days, his voice resonant as water in a cavern. "Now I understand. Words carry life only when born from silence. Only he who has lived without them can wield them to heal, not to wound." Eleazar trembled, for he knew. The silence had not merely disciplined this young Nazarene. It had crowned him. What power lies in a silence that teaches even the storm to kneel? This question haunted the brothers, and it was only the beginning. When he stepped out of the cave after those 7 days, we expected fragility. Eyes hollow, steps wavering, body bent beneath the ordeal. Instead, he emerged steady, light radiating from his face as though the desert itself had lent him its endurance. Yet what struck us most was not his strength, but the way he looked at the world. It was as though every stone, every ripple of air, every reflection of light had become a mirror in which he sought himself. The first sign came during the morning ablutions. He bent over the ritual well to scoop water into his hands, but then lingered, staring into the pool. He did not admire himself with vanity. He studied his reflection with the wonder of one seeing a stranger who was also kin. "Who am I?" Eleazar heard him murmur, so faintly it might have been imagined. He touched the water's surface, watching his image fracture into shimmering fragments, then waited patiently as it reformed whole again. Later, he was assigned the humble task of polishing the bronze mirrors used in purification rites. For most, this duty was monotonous drudgery, hours of rubbing, arms aching, until the surface shone. But in his hands, the labor became something else. He polished as if awakening the mirrors from sleep. Each stroke was tender, reverent, as though coaxing light from metal. Soon, his mirrors did more than reflect. they deepened. To gaze into them was to see not just the face, but the tremor of the soul beneath. Brother Simon, inspecting the work, was astonished. "How do you make them shine like this?" he asked. The youth looked up with his now familiar half-smile. "Mirrors do not show what we are," he said softly, "but what we are willing to see. Only when we look without fear, without judgment, does the mirror reveal the whole truth." These words echoed through the halls like a bell. Eliezer found himself unsettled. What truths had the youth faced in that silence, which now allowed him to look so deeply? Had he glimpsed not one self, but many? The self we show to the world, the one we fear we are, the one we long to become, and beneath all these, a core untouched, pure as a child's first breath? One evening, Eliezer found him by the spring, gazing again into the water turned gold by sunset. "During those 7 days," the youth confessed, "I discovered that within us live countless reflections. Yet beyond them all is one deeper reflection, what we truly are, unmasked, unafraid. And that reflection is beautiful beyond imagining." His eyes brimmed, not with sorrow, but with a joy so fierce it hurt to witness. "The desert," he said, "was the most honest mirror of all. It hides nothing, flatters nothing. It shows you exactly as you are. If you dare to look and not turn away, you may even learn to love what you see." In that moment, Eliezer realized. They were no longer witnessing a boy learning their practices. They were watching the birth of something new, someone who could one day become a mirror for other souls, guiding them to find their truest reflection in silence. What happens when a man learns to see his own soul without flinching? Perhaps then he learns to see the souls of others as well. That question hovered like a star on the horizon, hinting at what was yet to come. It was in the month of Elul, 2 moons after his arrival, that the secret within him first spilled into words. Until then, he had spoken little, answering only when asked, laboring in quiet, his presence more eloquent than any sermon. But one evening, a caravan from Damascus brought with it a merchant named Jairus, whose face bore the hollow stare of a man already half buried by grief. We welcomed him with bread and water, as was our custom, though his hands trembled as he lifted the cup. That night, in the refectory where silence usually reigned, Jairus begged to speak. His voice cracked with every syllable. His only daughter, 12 years old, had been seized by a strange malady no physician could name. She neither ate nor spoke. She lay pale as a candle burned down to its base. "The doctors say only a miracle can save her," he confessed, eyes brimming. "If you, sons of light, hold any hidden wisdom, I will give all I own to learn it." We murmured prayers for him. Johanan offered ritual words of compassion. Yet Eleazar could see the emptiness in Jairus' eyes, the abyss where hope had drowned. What balm could formalities offer a man who watched his child drift toward the grave? It was then that the Nazarene rose. He did not speak. He crossed the room in silence and knelt before Jairus. For long minutes he simply looked into the man's eyes, not with pity, not with judgment, but with a gaze that seemed to see the raw wound of his soul. Something broke inside Jairus. Tears poured down his cheeks, not of despair this time, but of release, as though some invisible burden had lifted. Only after that silence did the youth speak. His voice had changed. It carried a weight like the deep toll of bronze, yet softened by infinite tenderness. "Jairus of Damascus," he said, "your daughter is not sick of the body. She is sick of silence, the kind born of terror. She has seen what no child should see, heard what no child should hear. To protect herself, her soul has retreated into silence. But it is a silence that kills, not heals. The merchant's lips trembled. Then what must I do? I would give my life for hers. You need not die, the youth replied, his eyes shining. You must give her your silence. Sit beside her bed. Do not urge her to eat. Do not beg her to speak. Do not demand she live. Simply be with her in perfect silence. Let your silence be stronger than her fear. Let your presence wordlessly say, you are safe, you are loved, you may return. Stay until your silence sings louder than the echoes that haunt her. Jairus struggled to believe. For how long? He whispered. Until her soul hears your silence and recognizes it as home, said the youth. True silence is not absence of sound. It is the presence of love, and love alone can call a soul back from the shadows. The hall had grown so quiet that every heartbeat seemed audible. Jairus bowed his head, overcome. He rose without another word, gathered his things, and set out that very night, carrying not a scroll, not a formula, but a silence taught by one who had lived it. Weeks later, word returned. The girl had spoken again. Her first words to her father were, I felt your heart singing in silence. When Eleazar recorded this, his hand trembled. It was the moment he knew they were no longer watching a gifted novice, but a force that could alter destinies. Words born of silence had become medicine, stronger than herbs, deeper than ritual. And Eleazar asked himself, if silence could heal a broken child, what else might it awaken in a wounded world? After the healing of Jairus' daughter, the air in Qumran seemed altered. Brothers who had once viewed the youth with wary admiration now watched him with quiet reverence. Yet he did not change his rhythm. He still rose before the bell, still swept the courtyards with steady grace, still broke his bread as though each crumb were a miracle. The only difference was this. Wherever he went, pain seemed to lessen, as if the silence around him carried a hidden balm. The first to notice was old brother Matthias. For 15 years he had lived bent by fire in his joints, every movement a battle against agony. He had tried herbs, oils, chants, and still his nights were groans into the darkness. One morning, as he staggered beneath the weight of a water jar, the Nazarene appeared beside him. Without words, he took the jar, then placed his hands gently on the old man's shoulders. There were no incantations, no rituals, only stillness. Yet in that stillness, something unspeakable unfolded. Matthias's eyes widened. The pain which had ruled his body like a tyrant loosened its grip. Tentatively, he lifted his arms. No fire. He flexed his fingers. No ache. Tears spilled down his weathered face. What have you done? He whispered. The youth smiled, calm and luminous. I have done nothing. Silence has done it. When two souls meet without fear, without demand, there is room for love. And love dissolves all that is not itself, even pain. Word of Matthias's relief spread, though quietly, for our order distrusted spectacle. Yet the true test came days later, when Sister Marta approached him. She had fled to our community, scarred not in body but in spirit, escaping a marriage that left wounds no eyes could see. Nights for her were prisons of memory, each dream a dagger. With trembling lips, she asked him, Can silence heal a heart that has forgotten how to be whole? He took her hand, palm upward, and invited her to place it in his. Then he closed his eyes. No speech, no formula, only the two of them, hands joined, immersed in a silence that thickened until time itself seemed to pause. The sun moved across the sky. When they opened their eyes, Marta's face was transformed. The terror had softened into peace. Her first words, choked yet radiant. Silence is like returning home after years lost in exile. Eleazar watched all this and marveled. Could silence itself be medicine, Could stillness, shared in love, accomplish what no healer's poultice, no priest's prayer had achieved? The implications staggered him. For centuries, Essenes had prized silence as discipline. Now it was revealed as cure. And he wondered, if silence could knit broken bones of the soul, what else might it restore? Could it bind nations? Could it reconcile man with heaven? These questions smoldered among us like coals, waiting for the next breath to fan them into flame. The most sacred day of our calendar arrived. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. From before sunrise, the community of Qumran prepared with utmost care. White garments were washed until they gleamed like snow. The scrolls were unrolled with trembling hands. Incense of myrrh smoldered in bronze vessels, veiling the air with fragrance meant to rise like prayers. Every stone, every vessel, every gesture was rehearsed to perfection. For this was the day when heaven bent low to hear the cries of men. We gathered in the great hall, the walls echoing with centuries of supplication. Yohanan led with practiced solemnity, his voice a pillar of sound carrying psalms of David and lamentations of Jeremiah. One by one, each brother stepped forward to chant his portion, until the hall thrummed with a river of voices, pleading, confessing, beseeching. At last, it was the Nazarene's turn. He stepped into his place, clad in the same plain white robe as the rest, nothing to mark him apart. We expected his Hebrew to be flawless. He had proven his mastery of Scripture already. But when the moment came, he did not open his mouth. He closed his eyes and remained utterly silent. At first, confusion stirred. Had he forgotten his passage? Was he overcome? Murmurs threatened to ripple across the assembly. Yet before any question could rise, something unseen entered the room. The silence he held was not emptiness. It was alive, dense, charged like the air before lightning. Our voices faltered one by one until the hall was still as a sealed tomb. And in that stillness, we felt it, the presence. Not as metaphor, not as hope, but as weight, thick and undeniable, pressing into our chests, making our very bones vibrate. It was as if his wordless prayer had reached higher than our eloquence ever had. His silence spoke louder than our psalms. It told us we were already forgiven, already loved, already embraced. No groveling required, no formulas necessary, only hearts laid bare. When at last he opened his eyes, he looked upon us with a tenderness that undid us. Then he spoke, softly, yet with authority beyond human learning. The most beautiful words to the Most High are not those from the lips, but those born in the heart. In silence, nothing is lost in translation. The soul speaks directly to the soul of the universe. In that silence, we do not beg for pardon. We know we are pardoned. We do not plead for love. We feel we are already loved. We do not cry for peace. We discover it flowing within us. Tears ran down the cheeks of Yohanan himself, who had led these ceremonies for 3 decades. He whispered, voice trembling, "How did you learn in months what has taken us lifetimes to glimpse?" The Nazarene bowed his head, his humility unshaken. I learned nothing new. I remembered what every soul already knows. The truest prayer is silence, for in it, God prays himself through us. That night, Yom Kippur ceased to be a day of supplication. It became a feast of communion, without a word spoken. And in the silence, we felt ourselves knit not only to heaven, but to each other. What might a world become, Eleazar wondered, if whole nations learned to pray without words, and to listen instead of cry aloud? Winter waned, and with its fading light, the youth approached Yohanan with a request no novice had ever dared make. His eyes carried both serenity and fire as he said, "Master, Allow me to withdraw into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, alone, with no food but what the wilderness grants, no water but what I may find. I must finish in solitude what began here." Eliezer tells us the hall fell silent. Even the air seemed to hesitate. 40 days in the Judean desert was no discipline. It was a death sentence. Few endured even 7 without returning broken or lifeless. Yohanan studied him long, as a father weighs a son's resolve. At last he sighed, sorrow in his voice. "My child, the desert for 40 days can make or unmake a soul. Are you certain?" The youth's answer was steady, his gaze unflinching. "I have seen in dreams the cave where I must go. I am not afraid of death, for only by dying fully to what I thought I was can I be born to what I truly am." And so, at dawn, 3 days later, he departed. He carried only a staff of olive wood, a small leather flask, and the robe upon his shoulders. We watched his figure diminish among the ridges, swallowed by the vast silence of stone. At first, brothers climbed the heights daily to scan the horizon. Days turned to weeks. Some whispered he would never return. Others clung to faith, saying, "If any man can live 40 days with nothing but God, it is he." Yohanan organized vigils, prayers uttered through the night, though many of us feared we prayed for a soul already departed. But Eleazar, though his mind doubted, felt in his heart an unshakable certainty. Something extraordinary was unfolding in the wilderness. Not destruction, but transformation. On the 40th dawn, while drawing water at the basin, Eleazar saw a figure approaching along the path. At first he thought it a mirage born of longing. Yet, as the shape grew nearer, the truth struck him. The Nazarene had returned. His robe impossibly gleamed white as the morning he left. His face bore the marks of fasting, yet his eyes had changed. No longer merely serene, they burned with a depth that seemed to swallow the horizon. Eleazar trembled when those eyes met his. He felt himself red, every thought, every wound, every secret, yet not with judgment, with compassion so vast it seemed to cradle his entire life. The youth spoke his name, Eleazar, and in that moment it sounded as though it had never before been spoken correctly in all his years. Then he said, "I have returned to say farewell. The desert has finished its work. What I learned there cannot remain hidden in caves. It must be lived, breathed, carried to the world, not in words alone, but in flesh and in love." In that instant, Eleazar understood. Their roles had reversed. The student had outgrown his teachers. What had begun as initiation had become revelation. What, then, would this silence forged in 40 days of wilderness do when carried into the clamorous world? The brothers asked themselves in awe and fear alike, for they knew the world was not ready, and yet it was starving for exactly this. It was shortly after his return from the desert that power itself came knocking at our gates. A delegation arrived, soldiers in Roman armor, their crimson standards snapping against the desert wind, flanked by scribes from Jerusalem with scrolls and cold eyes. Their leader, a centurion named Marcus Valerius, spoke with the sharpness of one accustomed to obedience. "We have heard reports," he declared, "of a youth among you, a healer, a preacher, one who draws attention and threatens the peace of Rome. We demand to see him." Whispers rose among us like startled birds. How had the secret traveled so far, so swiftly? The healing of Jairus' daughter, though whispered, had crossed deserts quicker than caravans. The silence that healed was no longer hidden. Yohanan stepped forward, his voice steady but clipped. "Here, there are only brothers devoted to prayer. No rebel dwells among us." But the scribe beside the centurion smirked. "Do not insult us with denials. We know he is here. The only question is whether he is dangerous, or merely another deluded mystic? Before Johanan could reply, the Nazarene appeared of his own accord. He walked into the courtyard with the calm of a man entering his own home, though the spears of Rome gleamed around him. His robe fluttered in the wind, his gaze serene. "I am the one you seek," he said. "How may I serve you?" The centurion studied him. He saw no weapon, no army, no wealth, only a youth in white. Yet something in his stillness unsettled the soldier, honed though he was to measure threats. "You are accused of calling yourself a divine healer, of stirring crowds, of defying authority. What do you say in your defense?" The youth met his eyes and said nothing. Not silence born of fear, not the silence of evasion, a silence alive, brimming as though words would only cheapen the truth. The courtyard grew heavy. Even the soldiers, men bred for command, found their grip on their spears grow loose. The centurion pressed again. "Have you nothing to say? Your silence condemns you." But his own voice had softened, losing its edge. He was wrestling not with an argument, but with a presence that refused to yield to the game of power. Finally, the scribe, impatient, spat, "Your silence is guilt. Speak or be judged." Then, at last, the Nazarene spoke, his words softer than the desert breeze, yet echoing in every chest. "Silence is not the absence of response. It is the fullest response. In it, you hear not my defense, but your own hearts telling you the truth." The centurion's face shifted. He had interrogated rebels, cowards, zealots, but never one who faced accusation with such disarming quiet. At length he lowered his voice. "I see no threat in this man. His weapon, if any, is one Rome cannot confiscate. He may go free." The scribe protested, furious, but the decision stood. The soldiers departed, their sandals raising dust, yet the centurion glanced back once, his eyes strangely softened, as if respect had been kindled against his will. That evening, the youth spoke to Eleazar in private. "You saw today the power of silence before authority. Silence does not defend itself, for there is nothing to defend. It simply is, and in its being, it disarms the mighty." Eleazar shuddered, for he realized that what swords could not pierce, silence could undo with a breath. What then might happen when this silence was carried not just before Rome, but before the hearts of men everywhere? As the days of his stay drew toward their close, he gave us a final gift. He called it the communion of perfect silence. Never before had our community attempted such a thing, and even Johanan confessed he did not know what to expect. We gathered at twilight in the amphitheater of stone to the west, where cliffs curved like a natural bowl open to the sky. 37 brothers assembled, the aged and the young, the weary and the hopeful. The Nazarene did not stand above us like a teacher. He joined the circle as one among us, his robe no brighter than ours, his voice no louder. "Hear me, brothers," he said, eyes sweeping the circle as if touching each of our stories. "In these months, you have shown me the discipline of silence, but there is a silence greater than one soul can hold alone. It is the silence we create together. Alone, silence transforms the self. Shared, it can transform the world." Then he invited us. "Close your eyes. Do not strive. Do not force prayer or vision. Simply be together." At first, it was ordinary, a hush like that which fell every night when the bell called us into stillness. Minds slowed, thoughts thinned. But then something shifted. The boundaries between us grew porous. Eleazar felt not only his own breath, but the breath of those beside him. He sensed Johanan's serenity, Brother David's youthful restlessness, Sister Marta's healing sorrow, Matthias's newborn joy. It was as though we had become instruments in a single silent symphony, each note distinct yet woven into one harmony. From within that shared stillness, the Nazarene spoke, though his lips barely moved. His voice seemed to rise not from his throat, but from the very center of our union. "In the world outside," he said, "men compete to be heard. They fight to impose their truths. But in shared silence, no truth needs defending, for we all drink from the same well. No voice must conquer, for we all speak the same language of the heart." Time dissolved. Stars appeared one by one, glimmering like sparks fanned from our invisible fire. None of us wished to leave. When at last our eyes opened, something had changed. We looked upon each other not merely as fellow ascetics, but as souls revealed. Tears slid down cheeks that had long resisted weeping. Even Brother Samuel, usually stony, whispered, "I never knew it was possible to feel so complete and so joined at once." The Nazarene smiled, not with triumph, but with quiet fulfillment. "This is but a glimpse," he told us. "One day multitudes will gather, not for sermons, not for rituals, but to share silence. And in that silence, nations will discover they are one." That night, as each of us returned to our cells, Eliezer knew we had crossed a threshold. We had not only communed with heaven, we had communed with each other at the level of the soul. If silence could bind a small circle of desert dwellers into one heartbeat, what might it do for the whole human family? It was in the final dawn of his final day among us that he bestowed what Eliezer called the mirror of the soul. He woke Eliezer gently, a hand upon his shoulder, eyes luminous with the quiet fire of farewell. "There is one last gift I must show you," he whispered. "It is not mine to keep. It must be carried forward." He led Eliezer through the dim corridors to the small cave where we stored our ritual mirrors. The air felt thick, as though the stone itself held its breath. Before the largest bronze mirror, polished long ago by his own hands, he placed Eliezer. Standing behind him, the Nazarene set both palms upon his shoulders. "Look," he said softly, "not at your face alone. Look until silence shows you who you truly are." At first, Eliezer saw only the familiar, an aged countenance weathered by desert sun, lines carved by labor and discipline. But as his breath steadied, the image deepened. He saw echoes of himself as boy and youth, as seeker and teacher. Deeper still, he saw wounds he had long buried, failures, fears, shadows he thought forgotten, and beneath them all, something startling, a light that was his own, yet more than his own. "Do not fear what you see," the Nazarene murmured. "Silence reveals all, not to destroy, but to heal. Only when we behold ourselves without mask, without judgment, can we embrace what we were always meant to be." Tears blurred Eliezer's vision, but he did not turn away. For the first time in his long life, he felt wholly seen and wholly forgiven by his own gaze. Then the youth said, "Now turn your eyes to me. See me as you have just seen yourself." Eliezer obeyed, and what he saw stole his breath. Not merely the young man from Nazareth, but a being in whom humanity and divinity interwove seamlessly. A mirror, flawless, reflecting without distortion the light that streams from the eternal. "This," the Nazarene said, "is the final gift of silence. It allows us to see all beings as mirrors of the divine. When I am gone, remember, every face you meet will show you some facet of that truth, but only if your own heart is still enough to recognize it." The words settled like prophecy. Eliezer felt the weight of a commission, sacred and urgent, to keep this knowledge alive for generations yet unborn. That day, the youth departed from Qumran. Not with fanfare, not with ritual farewell. He simply walked back into the desert, carrying within him the silence that had remade him, and would, in time, remake the world. 30 years later, Eleazar's hand trembled as he etched these memories into copper. He was an old man, his body frail, but his memory unbroken. It wasn't magic he learned here, he wrote, not formulas or hidden chants. It was something greater, the discovery that true silence is not emptiness, but eternity in disguise. That silence heals, silence teaches, silence births communion. He wrote of how the Nazarene later stood silent before Pilate, his stillness more potent than defense, how he hung upon the cross, quiet not in defeat but in triumph, embodying a silence stronger than death. And to us, his final counsel endures. Each time you choose silence over noise, you honor him. Each time you find peace in quiet, his teaching breathes anew. You need not travel to deserts or caves. The true wilderness is within. There, in the pause between thoughts, in the breath between words, eternity waits. Eleazar set down his stylus, his eyes clouded with age, but his heart clear. He ended with these lines. The greatest miracle is not the healing of the body, but the soul at peace with itself. The true resurrection is the rebirth of a heart that has died to noise and awoken to silence. The kingdom of heaven is not far. It dwells in the stillness within you, waiting to be seen. And so the scroll closes, though the silence it describes does not. It echoes still, in the pauses between words, in the breath you now draw, in the quiet presence that cannot be written, but only lived.